The worst part about waiting for life-changing news is the silence. Not the kind of silence you find in peaceful places like a quiet park or an empty beach at sunrise. This was the heavy silence of a hospital hallway at 8 in the morning, where every passing second felt like it was pressing against my chest. I sat alone on a stiff plastic chair outside the diagnostic wing, staring at a white envelope with my name printed on it. Inside were the results of the medical tests that might explain the strange symptoms that had been quietly stealing pieces of my life for months. My hands trembled slightly. The doctor had told me the results could change everything, and I was completely alone. But before that envelope would open, before I even had the courage to look inside, something strange happened. A woman in a dark suit rushed toward me with desperation in her eyes and whispered 6 words that would turn my entire life upside down. "Pretend you are my husband, just for today." That morning, in that quiet hospital, I thought my life might be ending. Instead, it was just beginning. 3 months earlier, my life had been painfully ordinary. I worked as a maintenance technician for a small apartment complex on the edge of the city. The job was not glamorous, but it paid enough to keep my tiny 1-bedroom apartment and cover the basics. Most days were predictable: fixing broken faucets, replacing light bulbs, patching drywall, listening to tenants complain about things I could not control. I did not have much family left. My parents had passed away years ago, and the only person who had truly been my anchor, my younger sister Laya, had moved overseas after getting married. We still talked sometimes, but distance had a way of turning even close relationships into quiet memories. So when the strange fatigue began, I ignored it. At first it was small things. I felt exhausted after simple tasks. My hands would shake while climbing ladders. Some mornings, I woke up feeling like I had run a marathon overnight. Then came the dizzy spells. One afternoon, I fainted while repairing a broken ceiling fan in apartment 3B. That was the moment my boss forced me to see a doctor. Tests led to more tests. Blood work, scans, specialists, and eventually the envelope, which brought me back to that cold hospital hallway. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if opening it would mean losing the only life I had. That was when I heard hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. A woman in a navy business suit rushed around the corner, breathing heavily like she had been running through the entire hospital. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, but her face did not look like someone worried about business meetings or phone calls. She looked desperate. Our eyes met for a moment. Then she did something completely unexpected. She walked straight toward me. "Excuse me," she said quickly. "I need a favor." Before I could even process what was happening, she leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice. "Pretend you are my husband, just for today." For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood her. Hospitals were not exactly places where strangers asked other strangers to fake marriages. I blinked in confusion. She must have noticed the shock on my face because she sighed and ran a hand through her dark hair. "I know how this sounds," she said quickly, "but I do not have time to explain everything. My father is inside that room." She gestured toward a nearby door. "He is stubborn and proud and convinced I am alone in the world. If he sees me like this, he will worry himself sick." I glanced at the door she pointed to. Through the frosted glass, I could see the shadow of someone lying in a hospital bed. "I just need 5 minutes," she continued. "Sit beside me. Hold my hand, if necessary. Let him believe I am not alone." Something in her eyes made it impossible to say no. Maybe it was the quiet panic. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe it was because, for the first time that morning, I was not the only person in the hallway carrying fear in my chest. So I nodded Okay. Relief washed over her face instantly. "Thank you," she whispered. And just like that, my ordinary life stepped into a story I never could have imagined. Her name was Elena. I did not learn that immediately. When we walked into the hospital room together, I barely knew anything about her, except that she seemed confident on the outside, but deeply shaken underneath. Her father looked older than his years. Machines hummed softly around him while sunlight filtered through the curtains. His face lit up the moment he saw her. Then his eyes shifted toward me with curiosity. She gently squeezed my hand. "Dad," she said with a warm smile. "This is Daniel, my husband." The word husband felt strange coming from a stranger, but the man's tired eyes softened immediately. Finally, he murmured, "I was starting to think you planned to stay single forever." Elena laughed nervously. I nodded politely, feeling like an actor in a play I had not rehearsed for. But something surprising happened in those few minutes. The conversation felt real. Her father talked about how relieved he was, knowing his daughter was not facing life alone. He asked me simple questions: where I worked, how we met, how long we had been together. Elena answered smoothly. Apparently we had met in a bookstore. Apparently I made terrible coffee, but excellent pancakes. Apparently we were happy. And strangely, it did not feel like pretending. When we finally left the room, Elena leaned against the hallway wall and let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said softly. "That meant more than you know." I shrugged. It was not a big deal. She studied me carefully then. Her eyes moved to the envelope still clutched in my hand. "You are waiting for results," she said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded. Her expression shifted from gratitude to concern. "Are you alone?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she did something unexpected again. She sat down beside me in the hallway chair. "You should not have to face that alone," she said gently. And somehow a stranger who had asked me to pretend to be her husband had become the first person that day who truly saw me. What I did not know at the time was that Elena was not just any woman rushing through a hospital hallway. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city. Her life was filled with board meetings, investors, international flights, and endless responsibility. But sitting beside me that morning, she did not look powerful. She looked like a daughter afraid of losing her father. And when the nurse finally called my name, my heart started racing. I stood slowly. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than before. Elena noticed my hesitation. "Whatever it says," she said quietly, "you do not have to read it alone." For the first time that morning, I did not feel completely afraid. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the consultation room door. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The white envelope in my hand suddenly felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Elena stood beside me quietly. She did not rush me. She did not ask questions. She simply waited. That simple act meant more than she probably realized. I had spent months dealing with doctor visits and tests alone. Every appointment had felt like walking into a storm, with no one standing beside me. But now, somehow, a woman I had known for less than an hour was there with me. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The consultation room was small and bright. A large window let in soft morning light, and the smell of antiseptic hung faintly in the air. The doctor greeted us with a calm expression. "Please sit down." Elena hesitated for a second before sitting in the chair beside me, like she wanted to make sure it was okay. I nodded slightly. Strangely, having her there made the room feel less frightening. The doctor opened the envelope and looked over the papers inside. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of paper. Then he began explaining. At first, some of the words felt distant and confusing. Chronic condition, treatment plan, lifestyle changes, long recovery. My mind struggled to keep up. I was bracing myself for the worst. But then the doctor leaned forward slightly and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "It is serious," he said gently, "but it is not a death sentence." The words took a moment to sink in. Not a death sentence. A wave of relief rushed through my body so suddenly that I had to grip the edge of the chair to steady myself. I had spent weeks preparing myself for the possibility that my life was about to end. Instead, I had been given something else. Time, hope, a chance to recover. When we stepped back into the hallway, Elena looked at my face carefully. "Well?" she asked softly. I let out a long breath I felt like I had been holding for months. "I am going to be okay." Her shoulders relaxed instantly. A warm smile spread across her face. "That is good news." For the first time that day, the heavy weight inside my chest started to lift. We walked slowly toward the hospital exit together. Outside, the morning sunlight felt brighter than it had earlier. The world looked the same. Cars passing on the street, people walking along the sidewalk. But something inside me had changed. Elena stopped near the entrance and looked at me. "I am really glad you are okay, Daniel." The way she said my name sounded sincere, not polite, not distant, just real. "Thank you for helping me with my father earlier," she continued. "I do not know what I would have done without you." I smiled slightly. "I think you would have figured something out." "Maybe," she said with a small laugh. "But you made it easier." For a moment, we both stood there quietly. Then she looked thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Would you like to get coffee sometime?" The question surprised me. "You mean like a normal coffee?" I asked. "Or part of another fake marriage situation?" She laughed. "A normal coffee. No pretending required." I nodded. I would like that. That simple conversation should have been the end of it. Two strangers helping each other during a stressful moment. But life has a strange way of connecting people when you least expect it. A few days later, Elena sent me a message asking how I was feeling. The treatments had started, and they were not easy. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt exhausted. But every time my phone buzzed with a message from her, the day seemed a little lighter. Sometimes we met for coffee after my appointments. Other times we walked through the city park near the hospital. Our conversations were easy. We talked about simple things: work, life, childhood memories. But slowly those conversations became deeper. One evening, while we were sitting in a quiet cafe, Elena finally told me the truth about her life. "Most people think my life is perfect," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Why would they think that?" "Because I run a successful company. Because I travel around the world. Because people see the headlines and assume success means happiness." She looked up at me. "But most of the time I feel completely alone." I did not know what to say at first. It was strange hearing someone so successful talk about loneliness. My life had always been simple. Fix broken things. Pay the rent. Keep moving forward. But loneliness was something I understood very well. "I get that," I said quietly. She studied my face. "Do you?" I nodded. After my parents passed away, it was just me and my sister. When she moved overseas, it felt like the last piece of family disappeared. Elena looked thoughtful. "So that hospital hallway was not the only place you were alone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled softly. "Maybe that is why you said yes so quickly when I asked you to pretend to be my husband." Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe you just looked like you really needed help. She laughed gently. That too. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Sometimes it was just a quick coffee. Sometimes it was dinner after my medical appointments. Other times, we simply walked through the city talking about nothing important. But slowly something began to change. The fake story we had created for her father started to feel less like a lie. When Elena talked about her day, she called me first. When I had a difficult treatment appointment, she showed up without being asked. One afternoon, she even brought pancakes to my apartment. Apparently, she said with a playful smile, your husband's reputation includes making excellent pancakes. I laughed. I never said I could actually make them. Well, now you have competition, she said proudly. As weeks passed, her father began recovering in the hospital. And every time Elena visited him, she told him stories about us. Stories that had started as small lies, but slowly began to feel strangely close to reality. We had dinner together. We watched movies. We argued about music. One evening, while we were sitting on the rooftop of a quiet cafe, looking out over the city lights, Elena spoke softly. You know something strange. What? Pretending you were my husband that day in the hospital was the first time in years that I did not feel completely alone. I looked at her. The same thought had crossed my mind many times, because the truth was simple. Somewhere between hospital hallways, coffee shops, and late-night conversations, Elena had become the person I trusted the most, and I had the feeling our story was only beginning. But what neither of us realized yet was that the fake marriage we created for 5 minutes in a hospital room was about to become something much more complicated than either of us expected. For a while, everything between Elena and me felt simple. Strange, unexpected, but simple. We met for coffee after my treatment appointments. We walked through the park near the hospital. Sometimes we sat on the rooftop cafe, watching the city lights stretch across the night sky. Life was still difficult. My recovery required patience and discipline. Some days my body felt strong. Other days, even climbing the stairs to my apartment felt exhausting. But Elena never disappeared during the difficult days. If anything, she showed up more. She brought groceries when I was too tired to go shopping. She sat beside me during long treatment sessions. Sometimes we just watched movies in silence while rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere along the way, the line between pretending and reality slowly faded. Then, one afternoon, Elena called me with unusual excitement in her voice. Daniel, my father is finally being discharged from the hospital tomorrow. That is great news, I said. It really is. But then she hesitated. There is something else. What is it? He wants to meet you again. The request made sense. As far as her father knew, I was his daughter's husband. Of course, I said. That will not be a problem. There was a short pause on the phone. Daniel, she said quietly, I do not want to lie to him anymore. Her words surprised me. You mean tell him the truth? Yes. I understood her concern. Her father had been through a difficult recovery, and learning that the marriage had been fake might hurt him. But Elena continued speaking before I could respond. Not the whole truth, just a different kind of truth. I waited. What if, she said slowly, we stop pretending? For a moment I did not fully understand what she meant. Then the meaning became clear. You mean, we try for real? Her voice was soft. Yes, my heart began beating faster. Because the truth was something I had been quietly avoiding for weeks. I had already fallen in love with her. Not because she was a successful CEO. Not because she lived in a world completely different from mine. but because she was kind, because she stayed when life was difficult, because she saw me when I felt invisible. Elena had become the brightest part of my life. I took a deep breath. "I would like that very much," I said. The relief in her voice was immediate. "Good," she said, laughing softly, "because my father already believes you are the best thing that ever happened to me." The next day, we visited her father together. The hospital room looked brighter now. The machines were gone, and sunlight poured through the window. When he saw us walk in together, his tired face filled with warmth. "Daniel," he said happily, "my daughter tells me you have been taking good care of her." I smiled. "We take care of each other." Elena squeezed my hand. Her father studied us for a moment. Then he nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Good. A father only wants one thing in life: to know his daughter is not alone." Elena's eyes softened. She leaned down and hugged him gently. Later that afternoon, as we walked outside the hospital together, the air felt different, lighter, like something important had finally settled into place. Elena looked at me as we reached the parking lot. "Well, husband," she said playfully. I raised an eyebrow. "Still pretending?" She shook her head slowly. "No, not anymore. For the first time since the morning we met, there was no acting between us. No invented stories. Just two people who had started as strangers in a hospital hallway and somehow become something real." Months passed. My health slowly improved with treatment and careful lifestyle changes. The difficult days became less frequent. Elena continued running her company, traveling often, but always making time for us. Our lives were different in many ways, but somehow they fit together. Sometimes she joined me while I repaired things around my apartment building. She said it helped her remember what normal life felt like. Other times, I attended company events with her, standing beside a woman whose strength and intelligence amazed me more every day. One evening, we returned to the same hospital hallway where everything had begun. The chairs were still there. The same quiet morning light filled the space. Elena looked around with a thoughtful smile. "This place changed everything." I nodded. 3 months ago, I thought I was waiting to hear that my life was ending. She slipped her hand into mine. Instead, it was beginning. We sat down in the same chairs where we had first met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Elena looked at me and smiled. "You know something funny." "What?" "You never actually opened that envelope in the hallway." I laughed softly. "No, but if I had opened it first, I might have walked away before you asked me that question." She squeezed my hand gently. "I am glad you stayed. So am I. Life is strange. Sometimes the moments that scare us the most lead us directly to the people who change everything." That morning in the hospital hallway, I thought I was facing the end of my story. Instead, a woman in a navy suit ran toward me and said 6 words that turned my life in a completely different direction. "Pretend you are my husband." And somehow those words became the beginning of the greatest chapter of my life. Because sometimes the person sitting beside you in a quiet hallway is not a stranger. Sometimes they are the person you were meant to meet all along. And sometimes a small act of kindness is all it takes to turn 2 lonely lives into one beautiful story.